Tor, welcome to the Sipping Point.
Well, thank you, Lori. I'm privileged to be here.
Well, I know typically you're based out of the Napa Valley, but tell us where in the world are you today?
Well, you got me on that one. I'm in Las Vegas, which is not my favorite part of the world, but I got invited to do a few tastings and tell some history and some stories. So there are
Well,
people that like to drink wine in Las Vegas, I've been told.
I was going to say it's a great wine town for sure.
It
All
is.
right. Well, I know I let everyone know about the release of your updated book, and that obviously is going to give so much about your background. But if people are tuning in and they're not familiar with you, maybe you could just give us what was your path to wine?
Yeah, well, that was 50 years ago, maybe even a little bit more by now. I had a jazz club with some friends of mine in Southern California, and we did larger concerts too. I think Bonnie Raitt and Tom Waits and others. But I was more or less in the music business, enjoying myself, but through that, I was introduced to people that knew about fine wine. One of them was a gentleman who had a couple wine stores. I like to cook. He brought the best wines that were imported into the United States to the dinners, and I went nuts. I had to know everything there was. So he said, there's something happening in Napa, and this is the mid 70s. There's something happening in Napa. I want you to go up. And I was dating somebody at Stanford at the time, so it was very convenient. I want you to go up and visit wineries and give us a report and buy some of the wines to bring down, and we can have that. We can represent those wines in the store. So I would go up, and this was 75, 76, and I fell in love with the Napa Valley. The people, the place, the vibe, and of course the wines. It was an extraordinary time when you look at it. In the mid 70s, there were less than 50 wineries in Napa Valley. There was no destination restaurants, way before 1992 when Thomas Keller came. No place to stay. In fact, the mantra with the growers in particular was, don't let the sun set on the tourists. They wanted the tourists out at night, and then they could come up and visit during the day. It was an ag, blue collar, basically vibe that was Napa Valley at the time. When I finally moved in 1977 permanently to chase the dream, my parents were a little puzzled because they had thought Napa Valley was more well known for its insane asylum than the wines. So it was a magical period of time. It was a different period of time. I was very fortunate to see the last 50 years on the sort of the front wave, if you will, of Napa Valley history. You just wake up sometimes, you go, it's great to be lucky and be at the right place, right time.
Absolutely. And in your book, it's amazing that you had the pleasure of working with some of the icons of the Napa Valley and just California wine in general, Robert Mondavi, Andrei Chelichev. And I know you probably learned lessons from them that you take into your life even now. What are some of the things you learned in those years that were so exciting in California winemaking?
I looked at your notes this morning and I started to scribble a few things, and I write about a few of those things in the book. But if you want to distill it down, what Robert taught me in particular, and Andre, was that at the very high end, at the end of the wine business in Napa Valley that operates the best, most efficiently, and has really built the Napa Valley reputation that we know today, that is built on relationships. It's who you know, what your relationship is with those people. Let's say it's a famous grower like Andy Beckstoffer. You cannot get grapes from Tokelon, a very famous vineyard in Napa Valley, from Andy unless you have a reputation and you have a relationship of some kind with Andy. I'm always amazed after 50 years of being in this business that how much it keeps sort of circulating back to that it's about relationships. So Robert certainly taught me that. He had a huge ego. He was one of the greatest spokespeople, or the greatest spokesperson for wine from the United States, period, in the last century. But he believed in the survival of smaller wineries, working with larger wineries, and again, building a business based on relationships and open doors.
Mm.
Andre was very much that, very famous. Actually, in the 70s, he's more famous than Robert Mondavi. And Andre always had an open door. You could go into his office. You could be anybody. You could go into his office anytime. And Andre, hey, sit down. Unless he had something he desperately had to do, he'd sit down and he'd want to listen and talk to you. Andre also taught me one small lesson, too, which I've learned and I believe in, is that the greatest wines he ever produced, and he made wines for over a half a century, were the wines that actually had a little bit of what he called flesh in them. They weren't overly tannic wines. They weren't overly acidic wines, but they had a certain fruit core to them, and everything else was in balance. And in Napa Valley, we have that ability to find that core in a lot of the years that we work with the grapes and the vineyards that we have. So Andre taught me that, and he was right.
Well, speaking of wines, you sent me a couple of yours to try. So I have the Susan Cuvée, which is from the Hyde Vineyard Chardonnay of yours. And it's a 2023 vintage, just so you know.
Mhm.
And I assume Susan Cuvée is named after your partner and wife, Susan.
I hope so. Yes.
So this is beautiful, and I'd love to talk more about the fruit that's here. But tell me a little bit. I know you are so passionate about Chardonnay, and you defend it, to the end. Right before we taste this, why do you think Chardonnay gets such a bad rap with wine drinkers these days?
Well, it's a great question. The answer is a little complicated, but at the same time, very simple, I think, to most people. What happened I'm trying to think exactly what decade that was, but a few decades ago, somebody started to, and I won't name names, making a semi-sweet Chardonnay. And it went nuts, and it's still a very, very popular one. Then other producers started to make Chardonnays in that same style. Chardonnay, at one time when I came into the business, well, actually a little bit before, wasn't even mentioned in the grape reports. It was very small plantings in the 50s, 60s, 70s, very little Chardonnay in California. But once this sort of semi-sweet cocktail of a Chardonnay became popular, it was planted in a lot of places it shouldn't have been, and it was made in copious amounts. And what a lot of people were introduced to their first Chardonnays is what I consider really a wine cocktail more than what I would really consider Chardonnay, because it had a certain amount of oak character to it. It had, that lactose sort of popcorn butter type of thing, and a little bit of sweetness. That's a cocktail. That's not Chardonnay. What I make is something that replicates, we like to think of a great white Burgundy, for those that do like white Burgundy. And I'm not the only one. There's quite a few of us in California that feel very proud and think that we can go mano mano with the greatest Chardonnays in the world. In fact, if you look at the Paris tasting, every time they do the Paris tasting, not every time, but most of the time, our Chardonnay does best even the great wines from Burgundy.
And it's got this pear, some floral. It really just has a wonderful nose of fruit, which you mentioned, obviously, is something that Napa Valley can achieve. But I know you also are passionate about using wild yeast, both for the fermentation and the secondary fermentation for the malolactic, which gives it the creaminess and butteriness that some people love. Tell me about that. Do you consider yourself, I know natural winemaking now has a whole thing to it, but do you consider yourself really a natural winemaker?
Yeah, absolutely. Without putting a label on the bottle or putting it on a bottle. Yes, absolutely. Myself, my peers, the producers that are my friends and I consider peers, we make natural wines. We don't interfere with the process. Using natural yeast is a bit of a risky thing, but I actually learned that from spending time at a place in Burgundy again called Domaine Romaniconti. The winemaker at the time I was visiting was Andre Noble. And Andre, I asked him a simple question. I said, Andre, you've got the most expensive white Burgundy in the world. Why is it different? What's unique about your Montrachet? And he said, to him, it was simple. It was the microflora that had been developing in his vineyard over a long period of time, and that he would make the wines without introducing anything to that microflora. So it was no cultured yeast or any other kind of yeast to make it. It would be that yeast, it would be the microflora that had been naturally in that vineyard for centuries. And that's what we're trying to replicate in
Yeah, and it's got a great silky texture as well. You know, you mentioned, and it seems like the story you're telling, I think I know who you're talking about with the Chardonnay and the style, because I think it was one of the first wines I ever had. Um, and it leads me to, you know, what happened with Merlot, what happened with Rosé. Thankfully, Rosé has come back around and Merlot is as well. But what are your thoughts on labeling? De-alcoholized wine, and we make an NA wine. We have to put nutrition and ingredients on the label, but when it's wine with alcohol, we don't have to label or share additives that larger wineries or people may be putting into the wine. What are your thoughts? Do you want to see that happen?
No, absolutely not. I don't. Anyway, I'm a producer. I'm trying to keep it as simple as I possibly can. Again, when I talk about our wines and I talk about my peers, we don't add things to the wine.
Absolutely.
At some time, everybody will probably either naturally or just an extra hit will do a little SO2, and that's part of the process all over the world. What's
Hmm.
interesting in areas that are very warm areas and not as cool as some of the top growing areas like Napa and quite a few others, Sonoma, you have to stabilize the wine a little bit more than you would in an area that has cooler nights and longer growing seasons. So, not to complicate your question, because it's a complicated one, but myself, my peers, the best wines in Napa, the best wines in Europe are wines that, in my mind, are very, very natural wines.
Yes. And well, I guess what I fear is that consumers find a commercial wine, they don't know the difference, and therein may lie some of these things that you guys would never use. So it's an interesting topic, I feel like, right now in the wine industry. Should we label or shouldn't we label? But obviously we know your label would be very simple.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the good news is we could come up with one label and meet whatever requirements they throw, but I hope we don't get to that point personally. But
Yeah.
I'm speaking from my side of the fence.
Yep. Well, we have a couple of cabs we're going to taste here in a second, but beautiful Chardonnay. If you think you don't like Chardonnay, you need to try Tor's Susan Cuvée, the Hyde Vineyard, famous vineyard. I know Larry Hyde for decades has been working that vineyard. And again, I guess it goes back to your relationships that you have, that you're having access to these legendary blocks and
Well,
vineyards.
absolutely. And that's great you bring that up because getting Larry's grapes is virtually impossible for anybody just coming into the industry right now. He has a long, long waiting list. The Hyde Vineyard was mentioned in Wine Spectator's top 30 vineyards in the entire world, and that includes all vineyards, Chardonnay, Cab, Merlot, Pinot. It's an extraordinary place. What's interesting is, and I look back on all the vineyard partners we have, everyone is family owned, everyone is family operated and managed, and that it wasn't what I set out to do, but that's the way that our business has evolved. And Larry and Chris, Larry's son Chris, who really kind of manages the operation, are just great people to work with.
And in your book, we go through it month by month and thoughts from you as to what's happening in the vineyard and kind of relating it to life as well. But one of the things you talk about is bottling. And it always seemed that there's some sort of Murphy's Law during the bottling process. What's the craziest thing that ever happened to you during a bottling that was Murphy's Law?
Well, I can just say a few. So maybe stand back. You have this product, this wine that's in a barrel, and it's been, if it's a red wine, 2 years that you've nurtured this thing and you followed it, and it's your baby. You've been working with it over 2 years, and now you've got to put it in the bottle. All of a sudden somebody sends you the wrong corks. Now you don't have a trial run. It's basically the bottling line is there. The industry's evolved to a mobile bottling line sort of business. So bottling line's there. You can't go back and replace the corks. Maybe they sent you the wrong corks and they told you it was the right corks, and you don't know until that moment. Maybe the foil doesn't work right. Maybe the filler isn't working right. Maybe the hose going from your barrels to the bottling line breaks down. Maybe the glass that you've been working with in the company, they sent you the wrong glass for whatever reason and labeled it as the right glass. Maybe something with the label you missed and you went, oh no, this is not the right label or what should be on the label.
Oh, wow.
It goes on and on and on. Now, anybody like myself that's been in the wine business, that wears many hats, doesn't delegate them out to a lot of other people, hates bottling.
A lot of room for error there, but I do have a bottling that seemed to hit all of the marks: label, cork, and bottle. And this is your Vine Hill Cabernet Sauvignon. This is the
Yeah.
2021, just so you know. And so I know Chardonnay and Cabernet, those are your, focus at the winery. And this vineyard is very special to you. Tell me a little bit about this Cabernet.
Yeah, we are single vineyard really oriented, and just to balance it out, we're mostly Cabernet and have just a little bit of the Chardonnay. We don't make that much Chardonnay, but that is a vineyard that, like To Kalon and Dr. Crane and some of the other vineyards we're working with, is pure Napa. It would be, in anybody's estimation that's been involved in Napa Valley winemaking, it'd be a first growth. It would be in the top tier of all the wines. They started planting that was in agriculture since the 1860s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It's been, especially in the last 50 years, it's evolved into producing some of the great, great wines in Napa Valley. Harland, with their Bond project, makes wine out of there. We have a couple blocks in there. And it's an interesting, not to get too deep and too much into the machinery here, but yeah, it's in Oakville, which is certainly one of Napa Valley's great appellations for Cabernet, but it's in the cooler side of Oakville. So it doesn't give you that expression that, let's say, another vineyard like To Kalon in Oakville has, which would be a little rounder, a little warmer site, a little more generous fruit. It gives you more of that structured fruit, for lack of a better term, but I think it translates with many, more like a Bordeaux than a real California or Napa Valley wine. It's a cooler, maybe the better way to say it, it's a cooler expression, a cool climate expression of Napa Valley Cabernet. But it's certainly known for a lot of great wines, and that 21's rocking right now.
Absolutely. Lots of black cherry, blackberry, and really elegant. I know this sees about 20 months. I saw a French oak in the aging, but it just is so elegant. And I love that comparison to Bordeaux, because it really does sort of, I mean, obviously it's New World, but it does have a little bit of that Old World style to it. And might surprise some people that are used to maybe the New World riper versions that you mentioned.
Yeah. I think to me, it's very, very classic, excellent Napa Valley Cabernet. Not to pat my back, but I have a lot of peers that I fall into that category too, that are friends. But I think that's Napa Valley at its best right there.
Beautiful, beautiful. Again, I'm sure relationships with the growers there. Is it the Phillips family?
It is Bruce and
Okay.
Heather. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's been in the family for 3 generations now. They've been farming it. Bruce and Heather are really managing the vineyard right now, and they're just doing a spectacular job. Wonderful people, but very focused on quality, and again, great people to have a good relationship with and a friendship.
When I've been out in Napa, I've taken some classes at the Culinary Institute and obviously visited a ton of wineries. But I think what surprised me is that it is a really small, I live in a small town, about 30,000 people. It is a small town out there. You kind of think of Napa as this big thing, but everybody knows everybody. And it really does have that small town flair to it. But people are trying to, I guess, change that, maybe get an airport in there, build it up. What are your thoughts on the future of Napa and keeping it more in that small town agricultural community that you talk about in the book?
Yeah, well, agriculture, especially in an area like California, Napa Valley, is constantly under threat because there's urbanization, which we faced. Actually, if you go back to we have the famous ag preserve that I believe was put in place in 1968 by a group of vintners and growers that preserved agricultural lands and made it very difficult for anybody to overdevelop. That every year is under threat. It was in the beginning. Actually, the vintners that put that in place had death threats. They were going to put an airport into Napa, a large airport. They were going to cement the river, turned it into more of an LA look than really a Napa Valley. And if you look down at one, I mean, it's a beautiful area around Redwood City and actually the peninsula. You go down there. That was agriculture if you go back far enough, and obviously that was urbanized. It's a beautiful part of the world, but that's what Napa Valley could have been very easily if these restrictions weren't in place. Every year there is a threat. Now, a lot of people know or follow politics. With the initiative process, you can bypass this. That's been pushed a few times. It's been defeated, but I think we'll see that time and time again. There's also a battle right now on the To Kalon trademark, whether it is a brand or whether it's a place. A lot of us like to think of any vineyard and any place that has developed a reputation for fine wine as a place and not a brand. So we have, at least everybody's got an opinion on what's a battle and what isn't. If you're a developer, then we're the bad guys. But the golden goose and the egg, I should say, is keeping the best vineyards, keeping Napa Valley's ag alive, keeping it thriving. Don't threaten it.
Have you seen the show Yellowstone?
I'm one of the few that got into a few episodes. I liked it, but I didn't really watch all of it.
It's a similar kind of story, but a different place in the world, of course. And the battle between the developers and the ranchers, it sounds like a similar conflict. And now you mentioned To Kalon, and I know in 2011 you lost 90% of your vintage. And you talk about that in the book. That has to be heartbreaking, devastating. How do you stay resilient after a loss like that?
Well, you have to, and you're reminded. If I'm closing in on 50 years now. You are reminded at least once every year, if not multiple times, that the boss, the person who's really running the game, is Mother Nature, and you really don't have complete control. It's one of the wonders. It's one of the things that parts of the business that I love. It also can hurt us. It cuts both ways. We did lose 90% of To Kalon with a freak rainstorm that sort of shattered the set of fruit in the vineyard that year. Take maybe the saddest year out of my 50 was 2020, where we had the fires, and I did not make any red wine in 2020, so I lost an entire crop that year. It was heartbreaking. But I did not want to put anything in the bottle that I felt might be compromised. So we made that business decision and went forward with it, but it hurts. So we bow down to Mother Nature, revere what it gives us, but we're also very much aware that Mother Nature can sometimes be a little cruel.
Yes, she can. Well, speaking of To Kalon, I have your 2022
Yes.
To Kalon Cabernet Sauvignon. So tell me a little bit about, I mean, this vineyard is so famed. Tell me about what you create here with the To Kalon Cab.
Well, it's one of those, I'll step back. We've been working with To Kalon since 2005. And over the years, we've gravitated toward 11 blocks in that vineyard. It's 83 acres, but what's interesting, and it's not relatively, a huge, dramatic terrain to it. It's a gentle sloping vineyard that goes up into what we call a bench with alluvial soils. You look at it and it does not look complicated at all, but all those blocks I work with seem to produce different wines. So here I am with so many years of working with it. Our 2016 Tokalan won the redo of the Paris tasting, beating out Mouton and Scarecrow and Colgan and Levallois and other wines in that.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just this extraordinary vineyard. Okay, we've got these accolades. The vineyard has the accolades. There's probably more 100-point wines that have come off Andy Beckstoffer's Tokalan than any vineyard in the Napa Valley if you put them all together. Yet, I'll be very honest, I'm still learning about that vineyard. It just fascinates me that you can go from vintage to vintage and you think you've got it completely wired. Well, I've never really thought I got it wired, but you would like to think that you've got it wired, and you're still a steward of the land, and you're still learning what the land will give you.
It sounds like a little bit like life, when you're, I have a 20-something-year-old here and they have it all figured out. And then the older you get, you realize how little you have figured out.
True.
It's just, it's a journey, but the core of this fruit is so amazing, and the depth that's there and the fine grain of the tannin and how elegant it is. This is just very, very impressive. Is this one of your favorite vintages, or what are your thoughts on your favorite vintage from this cat?
Well, candidly, 22 was a little more challenging than 21 and 23. So it was one of those vintages that if the way I came away looking at it, it was a winemaker's vintage because we had a heat spell toward the end there, and you had to make that heat spell work for you instead of against you. And
Mm,
those of us that had been around a little bit longer didn't panic or paid very close attention to what the vineyard was telling us and made exceptional wines. But candidly, if you look at 21, 22, 23, and 24, 22 would probably be the more challenging out of those vintages. You're tasting a wine that I agree
excellent.
with you. Your description was dead on.
Really, really good. I feel like there's so many myths out there about wine with consumers and just rolling around out there. Are there any myths that consistently hear as you're doing tastings and wine dinners and entertaining people with your wine that you want to dispel for my listeners?
Well, the simple one is be flexible about wine and food. The red wine with meat, the white wine with fish or white meats and so on is absolutely, it's almost wrong, not right. You can have a nice Tokalan Cabernet with a lot of seafood. It's a matter of sort of making some adjustments to how you're preparing those dishes. And I'll give you one easy tip.
Okay.
So you have that Tokalan, and it's maybe a little bit too much. You're tasting the tannins a little bit too much. You feel a little rough while you're having that. Or let's say you have a nice piece of, we'll even go with a very whitefish, fillet of sole, and it's just not working together. Not a lot, but a little bit of salt.
Mm.
If somebody can go home tonight or the next couple days and you have a Cabernet in front of you or a wine that's a little rough or you feel like it's not really pairing, put a little bit of salt on the side and then try tasting the dish with a little extra salt. Salt actually takes out the tannins and the roughness in wine. Obviously, too much and you spoil a dish, but it's just getting that right balance. And I'll give you an example of that everybody knows. So, what do most steakhouses put on the steaks?
Butter?
Butter and salt.
Oh,
Salt.
salt. Yes.
So there you go. There's very few national steakhouses that don't put on some sort of fat like that, or butter or something, based and a little bit of salt, because just it's certainly and what's the number one wine that they normally have on the wine list? Cabernet.
Cabernet? Love that.
Not by accident.
Yeah, I know if folks want to get on the wait list to potentially purchase your wines when there are offerings and allocations, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I would go to the website, and again, there's a little bit of a wait list, but I believe that Sierra, who runs the show as far as that at the winery, We're a very small operation. Everybody goes by their first names, and Sierra's kind of the boss around that part of the business. I think she's put aside, which would be a sort of a welcome allocation for people if they're interested in dipping their toe in the water there, the Tor water.
Great. Well, I know your updated version of Reflections of a Vintner, Stories and Seasonal Wisdom from a Lifetime in Napa Valley just came out. So I guess folks can find that wherever they buy their books, I'm sure, or even contact the winery if they want to.
Yes, they can. Actually, we have sold out of the first edition. We added an afterword by a good friend of mine, Karen McNeil, who wrote the Wine Bible. Thomas Keller did the foreword along with Robert Parker Jr. So we have some friends that I've known over a long period of time that have also contributed to the book.
That's great. Well, this has been amazing. I could spend another hour talking with you. You have so many amazing stories. Thank you for sharing these delicious wines with us here on The Sipping Point. And Tor, I wish you all the luck in your endeavors there in Vegas. And I can't wait to see you next time I'm out in Napa Valley.
Thank you, Lori. I hope you do look me up.
I will. Thanks so much, Tor. Cheers.
Cheers.